In whiskey, the barrel shapes the season, but it never defines the spirit. We tend to forget about that in our own lives. Somewhere along the way, our job title, our role, our position, it all starts to feel like our purpose. The place where we've been aging becomes the place where we believe we're meant to stay. And then a season changes. A job ends. A role shifts. Or life just happens. And suddenly, we're left wondering who we are when the barrel we've been in is no longer ours. I recently had a conversation with my friend David Salyer, who sat right in that tension between the role we hold and the purpose we're actually crafted for. So if you're in a transition or standing in that uncomfortable space between what was and what's next, this episode might help you see the season you're in and the life that's waiting beyond the barrel that once held you. A quick note, our session was interrupted near the end, so you'll notice an awkward cut while we reconnected. Unfortunately, that happens with technology. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Crafted Clarity. We are speaking with our guest, David Salyer. David, welcome to Crafted Clarity.
Steve, I was so excited when you asked me to be on here because you and I have known each other now for 8 years, I believe it is, almost 9 years that we've known each other. And I was there when you started your journey in whiskey and learning and beginning that process. And so when I saw Crafted Clarity and I began listening to it, I love it. I love what you're doing. And when you said, "Hey, be my first guest," I was just kind of over the moon. So I'm glad I'm to be here.
Yeah, well, I am so glad you're here, and I could not think of a better first guest. Just of what you said, we've been on this journey together, not only in whiskey, but also in deep explorations of our faith and our purpose.
Yeah,
you and I were part of a startup church where we were helping a church trying to find their identity and their purpose, which really just leads into today's conversation, which is about the difference between our purpose and our position, and how we find or how we tether our identity a lot of times with the role that we play either in our jobs or in our vocation or even in our family. So I'm really looking forward to today's little chat here. So before we go anywhere, I want to start with the present, right where you are today. So when we think about whiskey, we think about when it finally reaches the glass that we are enjoying, it actually represents the result of years, sometimes decades, of refining and distilling, resting, and transformation of the whiskey in the barrel. But unlike whiskey, we're never finished. The whiskey is finished. We get to enjoy it, but for us, we're never finished. We're always in process, always becoming. So with that, and when you think about the season that you're in right now, how would you describe that?
So it's pretty crazy because if you had asked me, say, even just 12 years ago, if you had said you are going to be living in Tennessee, you're going to be a whiskey lover for one, but you're going to be in a completely different field than you are now, because as you know, I was a lead pastor for over 16 years. I was in full-time ministry for close to 20 years at that point. And so now in this season, I just could never have seen myself then. So it really does get to the point of that we're never finished and we don't know where the journey takes us. I'm pretty excited about this season of my life. It's a much different season than when I was pastoring. We could talk a little bit about that, obviously. But now in this season, I've kind of leaned into a little more, I think a little slower life. I think the living in the South is a little slower than it
Mm,
was living
mhm.
up in the Midwest, for one. But I love this season because you never know where God's going to take you. And I've met so many incredible people, such as yourself, and those that were part of the church that we were part of, that startup, but just also just all along the way, what God has done. And so I love this season of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we're going to be talking about purpose and position and roles and things like that, but the season that you're in right now, how is it different than the season that you were in previous?
Well, so now, I'm the senior operations manager for a large networking nonprofit for real estate investors. So I kind of oversee the day to day operations. It's just different, obviously, than leading a church. It's different in many ways, but again, it's a little slower of a life. I'm not doing the work. I'm overseeing the work, making sure that everything's getting done, that the as they kind of say, that I'm keeping the train on the railroad tracks. And so it's just great, just being able to work from home for the most part. We do have in person things too, but just being able to, that's one of the great things about technology, right? And even being able to
Hmm.
do this, what we're doing here right now.
Yeah. 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 So let's go back now
Okay.
to the season that we're going to be talking about. So you were a pastor of a church for 16 years.
Right.
Tell me about that season that you were in.
Oh yeah. So I, felt the call into full-time ministry pretty quickly after I got out of the Air Force. And so I did everything I needed to do, preparation for that, and became the lead pastor in a little town in Indiana in 1998. It was my first go as a lead pastor. Loved everything about it. It was a little church, and God really honored and blessed us while we were there. We grew great leadership while we were there. The church grew. We went through multiple building projects. And so it was honestly something that I never thought I wouldn't be doing. And that's why I said, if you had asked me 12 years ago, if you had said, hey, you're going to be doing so, I just wouldn't have believed it, because I loved what I was doing. It
Mm.
was, it was just who I was. I was kind of operating in what I felt like was my perfect purpose.
Now, were you a pastor before you went to that church?
So I was on staff at a church. I was associate pastor at a church, another little town in
Okay.
Indiana before that. And before that, again, I was on staff with a church in Ohio before that. So I had several years leading up to that as on staff at churches.
Okay. So then you always thought then, or at that point, you
Oh yeah.
felt like being a pastor, being a part of a church was actually tied to your calling and your purpose.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that it's so easy when because everything, God honored us, He blessed us, and we were what you would term successful in
Mhm.
ministry. We were affecting people's lives. We built a great uh, church that people loved God. They love to worship. They love to be together. And so you begin to connect, okay, this is my purpose, right? This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And the problem is that sometimes we get caught up in that my position is my purpose, right? And so
Mhm.
I think along the way, that's where I began to realize that my purpose is not necessarily my position.
Yeah. Yeah. When were you started? When did they start to call you Pastor David?
Pretty early on. Like, we got there. It's just pastor was just it was kind of like a badge of honor, right? And so everybody called me that. For the most part, there were some people that maybe didn't do it, or they did it reluctantly, but most people did. No, it wasn't anything that we required or we asked people to do. It was something that they did out of honor for us in the position that we were in.
Okay. And I think this is unique to being a pastor.
Right.
Um, we don't call, in my previous job, we didn't call me, Steve, director of marketing, you know,
Right. Right.
but Dave, Pastor Dave. I mean, so we are fusing your title and your position with your name. I mean, that's
Right.
literally smashing together
Yeah.
your position and your purpose.
Right.
So,
And I think it's funny you say that because I was just thinking we don't say CEO Bob, right?
no.
It's just not what we do. We do that in ministry. So yes, it fuses the two things together.
Yeah. So did that shape the way that you started to see yourself, even outside of your day job?
Yes, I mean as a pastor, and so you are on the clock 24/7. Like it's not there's a lot of jobs that when you go home, you're no longer like that. It just ends, right?
Hmm.
But in ministry and especially when you're the lead pastor, it becomes you're in that as people say, you're kind of in that bubble, in that fishbowl, right?
Hmm.
So everything, and so it just becomes you are your pastor, right? And it almost, and this might sound bad, but it's almost offensive when somebody didn't call you that.
Yeah, wow. So going back to CEO Bob, there's no expectation of CEO Bob doing CEO stuff when he's at the grocery store.
Right.
But if you're Pastor Dave, not only are we mashing in your title and your name, but now there's expectation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So, how did that affect how you were living in your purpose and your calling and your identity? I mean, did your identity as David disappear or overshadowed by the pastor part?
Yeah, so that's actually so true. So when you're in that role, no matter where you're at, if you're at Walmart, you're Pastor David. When
Mm,
you're, jogging down the street, you're Pastor David. And even to the point, that people that aren't even in your church, they know you as, oh, that he's the pastor at so and so church. So it does begin to really affect, like you have to be on at all times. There's no like you just can't you can't have a bad day. You can't have a bad day and say some things to the cashier or because someone is always watching and so
mm.
now you are it just puts so much stress and so much pressure on you.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, I can imagine being on guard all the time to watch what you say.
Right.
Um, okay, so were you okay with this identity mashup?
Yeah. I mean it was and at the time I think you get so in it that you don't realize how much you've actually lost yourself.
Mm,
And we tried to be good about that even with our, boys. They were young when we moved there and my wife trying that, but you just can't get away from it when you are when that's your title, when that's what you do. You just can't get away from it. And so it just becomes this it like I said, it's a stress that you don't even really understand.
and it's good when it's good.
It's good when it's good, and it's bad when it's bad.
So let's talk about that. So there were times
Mhm.
during that 16 years where you may have questioned your identity or started to think about this position, and was there tension?
Oh, yes. We had a few incidences that happened, and I don't wanna go into details necessarily, but, it was staff members and so at one point, we had to had kind of fire a staff member. And they had been part of the church from the day we got there, and his mom was one of our biggest supporters. And so as this was unfolding, it was we no longer had the support of one of our biggest supporters.
Mm,
And then, there were people they were just mad in the church and I was kind of like people are mad, they don't even know why. And it's like, and they were mad at me. And it's like, I didn't even do anything. I'm just trying to do the best I can to make the best out of this situation. And that really, yeah, for especially for a few years, it was hard, it was tough, and so, but you just got to push through because that's what
Mhm.
you do.
But it's interesting that, okay, so you're David, you're Pastor David at this church. Now, something was happening in the organization.
Right,
So nothing to do with you, nothing to
right.
do with your purpose that you wake up and you live out every single day by being
Hmm.
a pastor. But now the organization that you are living out this purpose is starting to face some trouble.
Hmm.
How did that affect your position, the way that people viewed you in that environment? And then the third question is, did that start to eat away at what you thought was your purpose?
Yeah, so it's tough because when something like that happens, well, now, okay, so everything is so, as we've talked about, mashed together.
Hmm.
Now you begin to go, well, this is also my job. This is my income. And so now you have to start thinking of it in other terms that maybe you like, that you don't always think of. You always, as a pastor, you trust and you believe that God is going to take care of you financially, because as in the church world, you rely on people giving to the church for you to make your income. And so now there's this added stress, and now you're having to smooth things over, and it's very difficult. One of the things I said was that you're never really friends with anybody, because you're always pastor. So no matter your relationships, they're all there's this always this underlying, you're the spiritual head, you're the spiritual leader of this church, so you're always their pastor, and so that always supersedes everything else.
That's interesting that as a pastor in that role and
Hmm.
as someone who's identified their purpose as being in that role, not having a friend type of that type of relationship with the people that you have been called to serve.
Right. Yeah. And I'm
Hmm.
sure that there are guys out there that maybe have figured that out, but I know from myself and also other pastors that I've had, friendships with through the years, it's a struggle. Like, there's a reason why a lot of pastors feel isolated when they're in, even though they're surrounded by people, they feel isolated.
Yeah. So tell me about this time in the church where other pastors were getting fired. You're still there. You didn't
Mhm.
do anything wrong. Um, did you start to question whether you should stay?
But there was a point, late 2013, that we started feeling inside that, we might not be there come near the end of the year, and or for long. And we kind of, Michelle and I had taken a long road trip at that point. We had a lot of time to talk, a lot of time to pray. And on that trip, we just came to the realization that we're like, we just really felt, we both were feeling it. And it was weird because in the previous, 15 years at that point, we had never ever felt anything like that.
Hmm.
And so it was kind of confusing. It was a little kind of disheartening, because it's like, why are we feeling this way? And so, but be able to talk about it and pray about it. And we felt like by the end of the year, we would know if we were going to be there or we are going to end up moving on. And still, at that point, we had no idea that how things were going to end up, even if we left there.
So during your time with Michelle, your wife, and this prayer time, were you praying about staying at that church, or were you starting to question um, being a pastor at all?
So at that point, it was more, yeah, it was more about the church. It was more about, is this where God is going to have us? Because at that point, I never thought I would do anything else
Mm.
than pastor. It's just this weird new dynamic of, now we're feeling maybe like God was going to move us on to something different. Again, at the time, had no idea that would mean that I would no longer be in that role as pastor.
Mm. Now, at this point, were you already able to discern the difference between your purpose and your position as pastor, or was it still tied together?
Yeah, it was. I think that at that point, I started seeing a little of the change or the kind of the thinking, because it is so. There was a point where God did speak to me, and He told me to throw off my priestly robes in
Mm.
worship, because He said that I needed to be able to come to Him as a man, just as David threw off his kingly robe and danced before the Lord. We know that there's a scripture that talks about that, danced in front of everybody and before the Lord. And God said to me, "You need to do the same thing. You need to separate your position from who you are, your
Mm.
position from your purpose." And so God began speaking that a little bit before that, and maybe just not even that many months before that, because I'd gone to a prayer summit
Right.
in the fall of 2013 where God really spoke that to me. So I think that there was already God was beginning to kind of fracture that and bring that to the forefront in my own mind, because He knew what was coming up.
Sure. So how did that feel when God told you to come to Him as a man? I mean, what was going on inside of you
Yeah.
in this moment of contemplation and self-inflection?
Well, it really kind of, I guess at that point, I never really thought about it, because as pastor, you're going and you're praying, and you're seeking God, and you're doing it for the church, and you're doing it, and you just feel like, well, I'm doing this because that's what God wants me to do. And then when God speaks to you and tells you, "I want you to throw off those kingly robes, or the positional robe, and come before me," you start then going, "Okay, wait, what have I been doing?" You
Mm.
know, it does begin to really think. You begin to think, you know, I need to make a change.
So everything up until this point that you thought you were doing in obedience to God, which
Mhm.
was, I am a pastor. I'm doing pastor stuff at a church because that's what pastors do.
Right.
I've embraced my identity. I've tied it to the organization, whether it's the small C church or the big C church. I've tied
Mhm.
it to this. So this is my identity. I'm cool with going to Walmart and, you know, ready to step in as needed or as called.
Right.
Um, but now you're being asked to, you're feeling this tension, which is allowing you to question your next move. Is that fair?
Yeah, right. And so that was kind of when, so later that year is when we knew it was the end of the year, 2014, 2013, beginning of 2014. And that's when we really knew, and again, we didn't know at the time when we prayed that prayer, like we were like, we know that we'll know by the end of the year. And we did, because of, other life circumstances that kind of pulled us out of that with our son. And we had to leave, because it was like, we can't really do this while we're also beginning this journey with our son, helping him recover from, his traumatic brain injury that he
Mm.
had, from being in Afghanistan. And so God used something, pretty terrible in our son's life to kind of move us in a different direction.
Yeah. So so at this point though, you are thinking that you're just going to be taking a pause and you'll jump right back in. So
Yes.
if we're to make the parallel between someone who is at a corporate job for so long, for 16 years. Let's say they're at a job for 16 years, something happens either internally, externally, a combination of both. They they make a decision to pause, and that
Right.
could be a career change. And so they're in this tension of, okay, well, what do I do next? Well, I'm probably going to go back to what I know, where
Hmm.
I've been. Um, I think that's a human gut response because it's safe. It's what I've known, so it's who I am.
Right.
I've just been a pastor for so long, then that's just part of that calling,
Right.
right? That's kind of like the
Hmm.
default mode. But you didn't go there. You
Mm-mm.
tell me about how that time where you're, in this figuring it out, mm, what made you go direction that you ultimately went?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting is when we were coming to the end of everything with our son and helping him, I was working again. I was working in the corporate world at a large pharmaceutical, company, or and they eliminated my job right
Hmm.
at the same time. And the timing was really perfect for what everything. And so my thought was, oh, well, okay, I'm going to be stepping back into ministry at some point. We're finishing this stuff up with our son. They eliminated my position, gave me, a nice package. And so I had some time, and it became, evident at that point, that as I was going along that summer, that I still needed to be working in the corporate world, and so I stepped into another. It was a nonprofit, but it was a regulatory nonprofit, and so that's the door that was opened for me. The National Association for the State Board of Accountancy. It works with helping those get CPA license.
Hmm.
So I was there for the next 5 years or so, I guess 5.5 years. I was there, and so again, we just see the hand of God. Even though I'm no longer working in the church world, as God began to move me into a different direction. Each way, it was God that did it, and so um, this was during that time I worked at NASBA. Also, the church that you and I were both a part of, they had an associate position open up, and I was asked to be brought on. He asked me to come on board, and so I
Hmm.
did that. During COVID in 2020, came on board as the pastor and so or associate pastor there. And so again, you're thinking, okay, yeah, I was, lead pastor for all those years. Now I'm back, pastoring in a part-time basis here at this, and so still thinking, well, ministry, it's just a different type of ministry, but it's going to be, it's this, but it's the same, right? And so that's what happened there. And then the pastor of the church we were part of, he ended up leaving and going back into worship ministry. And I was asked at that point to take the church, to be the lead pastor.
Hmm.
And all those years of not doing it prepared me for that moment, because I was able to separate my purpose from my position.
Oh,
And at that point, I knew, no, God brought me here not to be the lead pastor, which again, it's so hard to not step into what you know.
right.
And so I said no at that point. It's not for me to do.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that I realized that I was probably never going to do that again as my profession, as my position. Um,
Hmm.
and so, yeah, it was quite a many year journey to get there, but God
Yeah.
prepared me all along the way. But I knew it was not. I knew that I was supposed to continue what I was doing, and eventually, got the where I am now with the nonprofit that I'm working with now. So about a year later, actually.
I love this for a lot of reasons.
Uh,
One, the time that you spent away as a pastor allowed you to understand yourself and to speak more life into your purpose,
Right.
which I realize that we didn't really share what your purpose is. So we're going to come back to that in just a second here.
Right.
But that time allowed you to rest and to age. If we're going to bring back that whiskey analogy, the barrel
Yeah.
is your position. That's just the container in which you, being the whiskey, is aging.
Mm-hmm.
So the season that you were in the barrel, in the whiskey, was molding, who you are, and not only who you are and were back then, but who you are right now in this season, and ultimately the season that you're going into, because we're always going in and out of seasons. But then God did something incredible, which is, okay, you've been resting and you've been, in the spot. I'm going to give you an opportunity to see if this is something that you still want. It's almost like I just want to let you know that, um, give you a test to see if this is something that you still feel is aligned to you. And so then he opened that opportunity for you. And whether it's fear, whether it's familiarity, whatever it was, you said, sure. But
Mm-hmm.
through that, it was okay, the season's over.
Right. Yeah.
So going back to that aging barrel of whiskey, okay, that time, did its work. It did what it was supposed to through the refinement, through the seasons, through the heat and the cold and all these things, the pressure that you were going through, the pressure of, you know, what that church had gone through, and you personally and your family. That was a season that actually refined you into your purpose.
Right. It's pretty powerful when you get to a place in life where you can say no when you know it's no longer what you're supposed to do.
How'd that feel?
I mean, it's pretty freeing. It's pretty amazing. And the exciting thing about that journey, it was a long journey from 2014 all the way until 2022 for me to get to that point. So it was an 8-year aging process, right? If we're going to
There's
go
a
by
lot of
the whiskey.
eight-year-old
Yeah.
whiskeys that are really good, so I
So
just
it's
want
an
to put that out there.
8-year process for me to mature, to grow. And not only that, and I know we've talked about this before, but what was exciting about that was that, when I was working in the corporate world, 2014 to 2017 and the pharmaceutical company, the amazing thing about that is that, you know, God opened that door for me to work there because it it suited the purpose of the
Mhm.
season we were in. And Michelle already had a job working with a physicians group, and my job ended up being right across the street.
Hmm.
So literally at the time we were, living in Clarksville, driving. She was driving to Nashville. It allowed us to. We drove together, and like dropped off at my job, and she drove across the street to her job. And so when I got done, I could walk across the street and we could leave together. So there was great purpose in that position. But then when God, they eliminated that position. I got the job at NASBA. Well, then Michelle went through the process of getting her accounting degree and her master's degree, and started working on being a CPA. And so here I was at the regulatory board where you get your CPA license. And so she kind of had an in with me, and I fast tracked her application. There were some things that I was able to do that could have been kind of roadblocks along the way for her when she was testing, that we were able to get rectified. Because why? Because I was on the inside. And so we always laugh about that, because it was like, okay, God gave me a position to help her begin to step into what her true calling and purpose, position is. And then, now the place I am now, Michelle just started her own CPA firm. And
Mhm.
so the nonprofit that I work with, we have what we call, vendors or sponsors. And so she actually just became a vendor, a sponsor of this organization, to further her CPA firm. So
Hmm.
it's pretty amazing when
It
God's.
is. It is. And none of that would have happened had you just gone right back into the fire.
That's, yeah, exactly. And you don't see it till you see it, right? So it's
Right.
afterwards you start going, I'm glad that I was obedient and realized there's a difference between my position and my purpose. And I know you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about that. And one of the things I said was that when I was a pastor, one of the probably the most asked questions, people would say, "What is my purpose?" And most people are wanting you to say, "Well, you need to do this, sing, or you need to do, this in the church, or this is ministry," and whatever. They're wanting you to tell them a position. And
Mm.
and my thing was always this: look, your purpose is this. It's to know God. It's to grow a relationship with Him. And the third thing is to glorify Him. What you do on this earth is how you fulfill your purpose, right? But
Yeah.
your that's your purpose. And so everything else is just a position, and positions change. Purpose never changes,
Yeah.
positions change. And so we have to be able to separate that. And when we do, it's incredibly freeing in everything that we do. In our
Yeah.
relationship with God, our relationship with the church, our relationship with His people, and relationship with what we do. We realize, well, that changes, and whatever that is, it is. But through that, yes, I want to know God. I want to grow in relationship with Him, and I want to glorify
Yeah. Now, you've given that advice to folks who are asking for their purpose, for you to guide them through for their purpose.
Him.
Is that your purpose as well?
Yes, that's my purpose. My purpose is to know God, grow in relationship with Him, and glorify Him. That's our purpose. That's what God. That's why God created us. And I think that when we know what our purpose is, it's easy to step into whatever position God has for us in very different seasons of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that came to mind is, the purpose of bringing together the yeast and the water and the grains is to create a whiskey. That's not the end goal. Well, it is the end goal, but you need that barrel to hold it, that structure. You need the waiting period, and all the things that we've talked about here on the
Right.
podcast, as well as what we've talked about today. But at the end, you open up the barrel and you bottle it and you savor it and you share it. And so when you share what that whiskey was purposed for, why it was created, that's when you have conversations. I mean, when we get together for a whiskey, there's great conversations and ideas happen, and there is, there are moments and there's memories. So this is like the ripple effect. So when you chose to say, you know what, I know my purpose. My purpose is not to be a pastor at a church, because you clearly define that that's a that's a position, that's not my purpose.
Right.
When you were saying, look, I know my purpose and it doesn't have to be in this place, in this position, you were able to speak into Michelle, your wife. You were able to help her achieve a vision and a dream of hers, because you realized your purpose was, it was clear. And so that's the ripple effect of living in your purpose and not being trapped by, you know, the position or the organization that you live that out in. All right, I think you're frozen there. Oh, always love technology here, right? Oh man. Okay. We're going to give Dave just a couple seconds to see if he comes back here. All right. So we talked about how you being obedient to your purpose, the one that you knew that God created you to have.
Hmm.
And we talked about how this, by you not going back to the church, not going back to be Pastor David, but just
Right.
David, allows you to share with others and help them in their relationship, in their walk with God, and all the things that are tangible signs that you are living out your purpose.
Hmm.
You know, how does that feel? How does that confirm that you made the right choice?
Yeah, obviously, had had I just stepped back into what was comfortable and what I knew, it's very unlikely that Michelle would be have her master's degree and and be a CPA, and now started her own CPA and accounting firm. And so for years she supported me. We were in ministry together. You have to be, but it was really, you do everything that you feel God's called you to do, and she supported it, and she did whatever she did to make sure that we were that I got to live that. And I've said, there have been many times like I got to do what I loved to do and what I felt was God's purpose at the time, um, and pastoring for 20 years. And most people never get that opportunity in their
Mm.
lives. They don't get to do what they love to do for that many years. But then being able to, step back, step away, and then allow her to be able to begin to fulfill that in her, that position, which fulfills her purpose. Um, it, it it's pretty gratifying. And so I'm glad that I was able to go through the fire, through the process,
Mm.
so that I was able to separate it and not step back into what was just comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. So as we wrap up here, I like to envision that you and I are just sitting at a small bar having, a great glass of whiskey here.
Hmm.
If someone was sitting right next to us and happened to overhear our conversation,
Right.
someone who's in that in between space that you were in, and like many of us are in, where maybe a role has ended and they're not sure what the next season is for them.
Hmm.
What's something that you hoped that they overheard from our conversation?
I would hope that they heard that just allow the time to play out, and during that time, um, let it change their whole way of thinking about the way it used to be. In other words, you don't have to go back to what you always did. And I think it takes a lot of courage to actually do something different. And so I would just encourage them, just let that process play out, and don't force anything. Don't take something because I could have very easily said yes to pastoring again, and who knows what that would have come from. But I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, so I know that I chose wisely and rightly. And so
Yeah.
it's the same thing, like you don't just take your time and let things play out, and you may really love this new season of your life.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, what strikes me as we wrap up is that your purpose, it didn't vanish like the angels share in the barrel
Nope.
when the role ended. It was actually revealed. It was underscored. So just like the whiskey, the essence doesn't come from the barrel. It's the barrel that shapes us. And as we think about barrels, at the top of our conversation, we talked about how the whiskey isn't the whiskey isn't the end. The whiskey can have other life. So we all love whiskeys that are finished in like a port barrel cask or a cognac
Mhm.
cask. So when the whiskey is done in the one season in the barrel, they move it to another barrel so they can get more refined, more flavors, more depth, more character.
That's right.
So the whiskey can live on, it still fulfill its purpose, but
Mhm.
just in a new way. So what you said is perfectly true, which is it's okay for roles to end. It's okay for your position to end as long as you stay true to who you are, that purpose, and carry that to the next season, the next barrel, the next job, the next whatever is coming next in that next season, knowing that there's probably another season after that.
That's right. That's right.
So
Yeah, I'm in a honey barrel right now. Got a little honey finish to it, a little sweetness.
That's all right. That's all right. So, David, I appreciate the time and your insights and the authenticity that you brought to the conversation. This has been great, and proud to have you as our first guest here. So we will welcome you back in time,
Yeah,
hopefully.
absolutely.
Um,
Thank you so much. I really loved it.
all right. So that's it for this episode. I hope you keep coming back, and just remember, at the end of the day, the barrel may define the season, but the spirit inside, who we are, that's where purpose lives. And uh, clarity isn't clarity isn't found; it is crafted, as we just talked about. So, thank you, David.